Hello, everyone, and welcome back to episode 2 of the Museum of Video Game Oddities. I'm your host, Matt Fisher, and tonight I'm joined by a YouTuber, a video game store owner, and gaming history enthusiast, Miss Kelsey Lewin. Hey, Kelsey, how's things going?
They're going great. I'm glad we were able to make this work out since I think I've been blowing you off for like a month now.
Well, you had a house move to get done, so we can't blame you for that. How did that go in the end? Is everything you all sorted? You all set up?
For the most part, I mean it's great. I have my own game room now, which is the
Hmm.
first time in my life I've actually had a room to dedicate to my own stuff. It's mostly set up, but I do have a pile in the corner that's just kind of I don't know where to put this.
That that would be the one thing I think I dread most about moving house is trying to pack up all the stuff that I have in my game room and studio. It's not even just the amount of stuff, it's sort of just the complexity of cables and all sorts of, and then reorganizing everything on the other end. I can't even imagine what it's going to be like because the sort of the stuff that's in here has, you can't see behind the green screen obviously, has like grown significantly since we moved in, and I dread the day that we have to move it all out. So I don't envy you for that.
Yeah, it's not fun. It's definitely not fun. It's kind of cool to be like to start over and try to figure out where everything goes, but at the same time, it's also really difficult because
Hmm.
I'm like, how much room is this going to take up? How many shelves do I have to allocate to this section? And I don't know, it ends up being a math problem, and I don't
I
like math
I
problems.
was going to say, and it's always more than you think. It's
Yeah.
you don't realize how much stuff you have until you start putting it on shelves. Um, so for those
Yeah,
of
I
you,
added a couple shelves and I was excited. I was like, "Ooh, maybe I can start displaying some of my collector's editions like outward now instead of having them in a stack." But no, most of them are still in a stack.
so those for those of you who don't know Kelsey, you can see her appearing on well, a few different channels. So you can see her appearing on the Metal Jesus YouTube channel as well as her own. You may also see her at conventions throughout the US, either as a panelist or with Pink Gorilla, which is your store that you co-own, correct?
Correct. Yeah, we've got two locations in Seattle, Washington. I co-own it with my fiance and have been owned it for about 2.5 years now at the time of recording, so
Hmm.
going pretty well.
How did that come about? I mean, when was the decision that was like, yeah, this could be ours? Let's do it. Because didn't you work there beforehand?
Yeah, exactly. So my fiance and I were both managers there for several years. I think I started in 2012 and he started in maybe 2011.
Hmm.
And years later, the original owner had sort of, he opened the business in 2005. He was just kind
Hmm.
of done with it. He was like, I've spent a lot of my life on this. I wasn't really present in the store for the most part. He was
Right.
just kind of letting it run itself.
Hmm.
So he just didn't really want to do it anymore. So we offered to take it over for him and buy it out from under him, and it ended up working out really well. It was really more my fiance's idea. I mean, I love owning the game store, and I love it now. I loved managing it as well, but I can't say that, it was like my dream ever since I was five
Hmm.
years old to own a game store. So it was kind of an interesting shift for me, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. I love it.
And retro game is kind of in the DNA of the store, isn't it?
Yeah, it's retro games, it's import games. We also do like import plushies and merchandise and that sort of thing. Japan gets so many cool
Hmm.
keychains and little figures and that sort of thing, especially from video game series,
Yeah.
but also just kind of in general, like random cute stuff. So, especially since we took over, we've added a lot to that sort of side of the store.
Hmm. And that's actually how we met originally, because I was originally working for Sega, and it was at PAX West, and I'd been to the store, and then eventually we ended up swapping a Sega Anniversary USB 4. Where is he? He's over here.
That's right. I was just about to mention that. Yeah, you were.
My pink gorilla that I still have in my game room here. Actually, it was really funny. Going back on the plane after the event, I basically I pack really light, so I realized afterwards that I'd been buying stuff at the convention and I didn't have any room for it. So going back, like my backpack, in one side I had a Kirby that I'd bought from the store and my pink gorilla in the bottle holders of my bag. And then the guy, airport security, knew exactly what the pink gorilla was. He was like, "Where did you get that? Were they at the event?" And it's kind of like, well, yeah, they were. at their usual spot by the men's toilets. I should say the store's usual spot by the men's toilet, not yours specifically.
Yes. I don't just hang out
No.
there for fun, but
But that's a good place to be at a convention. Not exactly the freshest place to be, but you know, people have got to go past it at some point during the event.
you know, I'm far enough away at the register. We're far enough away from the actual bathroom that it's never been an issue. My fiance was like, "What if we changed it up and we put the register on the other side?" I'm like, "Nah,
No.
let's not do that."
No, by day 3, you'd probably regret that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess you've been saying it. I guess I need to offer some congratulations as well on the engagement.
Oh,
Uh,
thank you.
I watched the Metal Jesus video, and that was really cool. I got to commend him on the way he did it, because I also did my proposal in front of a crowd and know how nerve-wracking that can be.
Is
But
that right?
yeah,
What was your proposal?
I basically, when I used to work for an event company, and we did a few different things, but one of them was we'd do like a festival every year, which was like a family-friendly music, food, and cars festival. And I spoke to my boss about doing a proposal potentially on stage, because I'm generally quite a shy guy, so she would never see it coming, because she kind of knew that it was around the corner. So I thought, well, got to do it in a way that she would never expect. And I got kind of worried, because I asked him, and then he was like, "Oh yeah, but we got to do it big. You know, we got to have like Formula One cars and plane drops and all sorts of things." And then he just left. And for months, I had no idea what he was. But in the end, it was basically I got her sister-in-law, sorry, my future sister-in-law at that time, and future brother-in-law, to essentially convince her to come backstage, because she's really shy as well. And she's like, she always had access to come backstage. She's like, "No, I don't want to get in people's way." But the band that play their song were playing that year, so I managed to convince them to come backstage. And then as they went off, just before the next band came on, there was a radio DJ over here, who hosts the event. He sort of came on, we did a little thing on stage, and we brought her on stage in front of she seems to change the numbers of how many people it was every time she tells the story. But I think it was about 26,000 people.
Wow.
I think I did have the video on my YouTube channel or something, but then Sony copyright claimed it for the music that they played at the end of when she said yes. So that's not there anymore. But yeah, I know how nerve-wracking it is for the guy asking, and I know how weird it is for the person receiving a proposal in front of that kind of audience. So sort of aside from the game store, in terms of YouTube, I mean, I guess you initially came to be known as part of the Metal Jesus crew, but how did that relationship start?
So we basically, I mean, I guess he was a customer, is what I
Mm.
should say it started with, but really I met him at John Hancock's event, which is Cowlitz Game for Kids.
Hmm.
It's like a little mini swap meet,
Yeah.
usually, with some auction items and that sort of thing to benefit charity. So that was sort of the first time I was actually introduced to him as, "This is Jason. He's a YouTuber," and this was years and years ago. So I mean,
Yeah.
he was growing, but he wasn't nearly as big as he is now, of course.
Mm.
So that was when I met him and became aware of him. He came into the store a few more times, and really we were just kind of friendly acquaintances for a long time until I appeared on a random podcast, and I
Mm.
can't even remember why. I think, it was just a friend. It wasn't like at that point there was really nothing special I was doing. I was just the
Mm.
manager of a video game store. And he apparently listened to that podcast and then just reached out to me and was like, "Hey, you seem like you know what you're talking about. Do you want to come be in a YouTube video?" And I've always done, like, when I was in middle school and high school, I did like theater and that sort of thing.
Mm.
I'm long out of that now, but basically I don't really have stage fright or anything like that. So I was like, sure, why not? I'll do that YouTube thing. And then of course we became actual friends out of
Mm.
that. But it was kind of a weird way to start, I think.
And that was the start of standing on the box to
Yes. Yeah,
no.
that was pretty quickly apparent. Like, we're not going to fit in the frame together.
And since then, I mean, you've obviously started doing your own videos on your YouTube channel as well as the podcast Game Blitz, which I guess is on kind of like a hiatus now.
Yeah,
Um,
we're kind of done with it now. I really do love it and I miss it, but I've started like 20 different projects and
hmm,
I can't even remotely put a good amount of time into any of them right now. And so I'm trying to kind of pare down and focus a little bit rather than trying to do a little bit of everything. I want to do a lot of a couple
hmm.
things.
Well, I'm impressed that you guys managed to get through 70 odd episodes because I mean it is actually quite a thing to, to be able to not just produce a show between the two of you, but then also plan out what you're going to discuss on a regular basis. It's, it's a big thing, and especially when you're already a working person and you've got your own YouTube channel, you've got your own projects and all sorts of
Yeah.
things. But and in those podcasts and in your own videos as well, you often delve into like the lesser known or lesser talked about aspects of gaming history, which is exactly why I thought you'd be perfect for this series, because we embrace the weird, if we can do in gaming. So with that in mind, I shall officially declare the museum open for donations. So Kelsey, what did you like to offer to the museum?
Well, I unfortunately don't actually have the item that I'm offering,
That's
but
fine.
because this is all pretend, we're just going to do
So,
it anyway.
yes.
Um, I'm going to offer the Gluco Boy, which is something I did a video on kind of recently,
Hmm.
and it's basically, I mean, as far as I know, there's two in existence. I'm sure there's more than that, but those are the only two I've been able to track down in the
Mm.
history of ever. So we might have to wrestle it out of the hands of its inventor, but
That's
that's okay.
fine. That's fine. I mean, there's ways of getting things, and accidents can be arranged, and all sorts of things. So I'm so glad you chose this because it's one of the weirdest things I've ever seen, and yet it seems like it's done really well.
It
Um,
surprisingly it is. It in- especially because it went through, kind of a whirlwind of development. So I mean,
mm,
this thing has no business being as good as it is. And I'll back up and kind of explain what it is real
yeah.
quick. So the Gluco Boy is a blood glucose monitor and game cartridge for the Game Boy Advance, all built into one. It has 5 games total on it, 2 which are like real complete main games, and then
Hmm.
3 little mini games. And this was an item that was basically created to kind of incentivize kids to actually test their blood glucose, diabetic kids, of course. So most kids don't want to stab themselves. That's
No.
perfectly reasonable
Yeah, that's perfectly
response
understandable.
from a child. So instead of, forcing them to do this horrible, stab yourself and test your blood glucose a couple times a day, the inventor of this product, his name is Paul Wessel, he decided he wanted to make it fun for them and give them some,
Mm,
you know, some incentives and some prizes essentially for doing it consistently. And he was inspired because his son was diabetic and he would always conveniently lose his blood glucose meter,
hmm.
but he always knew where his Game Boy was. So this was quite a few years before the Gluco Boy actually came out. So his original patents, he was looking at making this for like the Game Boy or Game Boy Color.
Hmm.
And of course, it took so long that it wasn't able to come out until the Game Boy Advance. But the that's kind of like the basics behind it. It's really just, you get in-game rewards, basically, for lack of a better term, microtransactions paid for in blood.
That's what I was gonna ask. I watched your videos and your video on it, and it was like this seems to work like in microtransactions, but instead of money, you're using blood tests. You're paying with it with
Yep.
blood, basically. But this is
And
this.
I was going to use that line in my video, but Paul Wessel was such a nice, sincere
Yeah,
guy. I was like, I don't want to like use this cheesy line
yeah. It sounds
when he put so much heart into this thing. He deserves better than
it
that.
sounds more menacing than it actually is. But this is what I loved about the Game Boy because it's kind of since smartphones kind of blew up, all the weird and wonderful stuff have now just appear as apps, whereas
Right.
before they mainly appeared on like not just the Game Boy series, but like the DS has got so many weird peripherals and things that go with it. And the Game Boy, I mean, there's the Game Boy sewing machine. There's all sorts of things. All these things that would now appear in like an app usually found their way onto Nintendo handhelds, and they'd
Right.
usually have some sort.
Computing has gotten so cheap these days. So,
Hmm.
back then, making an entire computer interface for something was really expensive.
Hmm.
So, but now we carry one, or I guess it's sort of the same principle. We carry around this little computer, our smartphones with us all the time. So back then there wasn't such a universal thing, but
Hmm.
you would get pretty close with something like a Game Boy or a DS or even, an NES before PCs were in every household.
Yeah. So instead, yeah. So it's sort of for testing blood glucose levels, but then you've got these games built in, and they're again usually if with this kind of thing, you'd expect it to be like a weird little mini game, but in fact, there's things like this. There's basically a full RPG built into this thing, isn't it? It's kind of like shades of
Yeah.
Earthbound throughout.
Yeah, I mean, if you've played games like Captain Novolin and that sort of thing, I mean, that was really the quality I was
Hmm.
expecting from this. So I should back up a little bit and mention that because no one has ever found one of these on the secondhand market,
Hmm.
it was only released in Australia, so that already cuts your
Hmm.
market pretty thin. And of course, only diabetics would have bought it, right?
Hmm.
So no one's ever found one. So the games were until now completely undumped,
Hmm.
and still the official full versions of the game are undumped. But I was able to track down a couple of developer builds, including one that is pretty close to the end dev build. You can, as far as I can tell, you can play through the games all the way. So, but they are, being that they're the dev builds, they start you off with a bunch of you won't be able to test your blood glucose because I don't have the actual
Sure.
thing. So it just kind of gives you all the points that you would get from testing your blood
Hmm.
glucose. So it's not quite the same, but it's pretty close. Um, but yeah, I mean, these are games that, yeah, I assumed it would be like, here's some diabetes trivia and some dumb mini games
Hmm.
and, just kind of your standard edutainment that's frankly not very good. But
Hmm.
the people who made the games on this sensory sweep, they were like pretty creative, and
Hmm.
usually they do stuff like, the I forget if I'm getting this correct or not, but like the Tale of Despero Game Boy Advance games, just like really
Yeah.
licensed movie stuff, not stuff that's not very fun for developers. So I think for this one they really got to kind of have fun with it,
Yeah.
and that produced some really creative stuff.
Yeah, it kind of gave them some creative freedom to just sort of go crazy with it. But did it, so what one thing I didn't quite understand. So what was Digit? Was that a DS version of what it was going to be or something?
Yes, well, so essentially what happened is, this came out in Australia for the Game Boy Advance, and it did okay, but Bayer, huge healthcare company,
Hmm.
came along and they're like, we want this idea, so we're going to buy the company and we're going to see if, this is a model that makes sense for us and for future Nintendo handhelds or whatever. So
Hmm.
by the time they bought it, it was the DS years at that point. So they were
Yeah.
developing for the DS. So the Bayer Digit is essentially the same concept. It's slightly different because it is a DS cartridge
Hmm.
and a blood glucose monitor
Right.
that work together rather than it all being in one.
Hmm.
But it's their version of it, and you can buy those fairly cheap. I think you can still get them on eBay for like $40. They sold them at CVS. You might not have seen it because it's kind of weird,
Yeah.
but it wasn't an impossible to find thing like the Gluco Boy was. So you
Hmm.
can, if you want one of these, I'm sure all of the actual test strips are expired at this
Hmm.
point, but you could still totally play the Bayer Digit.
So with that one, did it plug into the Game Boy Advance slot on the DS and DS Lite, and then the cartridge went in the
Exactly.
back? Right. Okay. So it's another
Yeah,
one of those
and
weird.
there was a way to connect it to the DSi wirelessly as well,
Okay.
which is interesting because when I was doing research for this, a lot of sources got that completely wrong. They're like,
Hmm.
"Oh, you're out of luck if you have a DSi," but I'm like flipping through the manual. I'm like, "Here's instructions on how to
Hmm.
do it right here." So
So
just kind of a weird thing.
so the Game Boy Advance version, that did that get a full retail release, even if it was only in Australia?
I mean, technically, you couldn't go to like an EB Games or GameStop or whatever it is they have in Australia and buy it.
Hmm.
As far as I can tell, you could only buy it online. Although I mean, that just means I couldn't find any proof that you could buy it
Hmm.
anywhere other than online. But you could buy it through like Australian diabetes help websites, and
Right.
then they also had their own website. So basically, it would just all link to like, here's a place where you can get it. Maybe there was some print stuff, nothing I was able to find, but yeah, I mean, you would basically have to be in the diabetes community in Australia for this thing even be on your radar.
Which is not the biggest community in the world.
No, I mean, I'm sure, you know, obviously some people bought it. Bayer wouldn't have just
Mm.
bought a completely, a product that sold nothing and did nothing, right? But um,
So
yeah, I mean, it wasn't an easy thing to get even in Australia, and of course, that's already not a huge market. So,
no. So did you say, as far as you know, there's only two in existence?
well, I'm sure there's way more because I'm sure that Paul Wessel is the inventor. He
Yeah.
had a couple people who worked for him at this company, Guidance Interactive, that he started, and I'm sure they all got a copy as well. In fact, I know that one of the people, Andy Swanson, had one at one point, although he
Mm.
says he no longer has it, and I don't know where that is. So Paul Wessel has one. He says it's sealed and sitting in a box somewhere, and then Bayer has one,
Mm.
just encased in glass. But what they did when they took over, when they bought Guidance Interactive, they destroyed all of the remaining stock.
Oh
And I don't know
wow.
if I mean, I don't know if anything else was like recalled beyond that, but any remaining units, rather
Yeah.
than being, sold off or even recycled, they were all destroyed. So, and I have no idea how many units that was.
Mm.
Paul Wessel told me it was like 80,000 or so that were made,
Wow.
or that were, he said sold, but I think he just means manufactured.
Right.
So,
But, but this is
hard to say.
this is the thing when people talk about video game preservation. It's not about Nintendo taking down ROM sites and people saying, oh well, that's going to destroy video game preservation. It's not necessarily. It's the things that they sort of, there's only a few known ones in existence, and it's trying to find them and either preserve them by dumping them, or trying to at least tell a story of how they worked and show them exactly, how, why they were important. And that's probably the most important thing when it comes to video game preservation. It's not necessarily making sure that there is still copies of Super Mario Brothers 3 NES ROM
Right.
on a million different websites. It's finding the things that could have been lost. And the things,
Yeah.
like,
And conducting the interviews too. I
yeah.
mean, there's so many stories that are still completely untold. I mean, one of the guys I spoke to, who worked at Sensory Sweep developing these games, I mean, he had never been interviewed before, and I'm
No.
sure he has tons and tons of stories. I mean, he's not Shigeru Miyamoto, of course, but before these people are gone completely, it's part of preservation is just trying to get some of the info out of them, even if you don't do anything with it, even if it's just, all right, we got an interview,
Hmm.
here's some extra information if we ever want to,
Well,
make a full video series out of this or a book or whatever. But that part's important too.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say, because it's kind of, these things are in living memory for the moment, because video games are, a fairly young media, but they're not going to be in living memory forever. So it's kind of like, the whole point is you kind of need to try and do that as you can. There's loads of stories of like early filmmakers who, a war hit or something and all their films got destroyed, and then that's that. And then if no one does the research on them, those films are just lost. They're just gone forever. Even if the actual print is gone, even the memory has gone. And once the memory's gone, it's gone.
Right.
Um, so that's really important. That's kind of why I was really happy when you said you were gonna suggest the Gluco Boy, because it is a thing that not many people have talked about. You've probably done, well, as you say, the guy that you interviewed had never been interviewed before, so you've probably done the most in-depth look at the Gluco Boy there's ever been. um,
The people in the Video Game History Foundation Discord just address me as like the Gluco Boy expert at this point. So,
Well,
which is not much of a title. I mean, it's probably just that I'm the only Gluco Boy,
well,
the only person who's really researched it.
I was going to say it is true. There's probably, I mean, other than people who did actually work on it, there's probably no one else in the world that knows more about the Gluco Boy at this point than you do.
It's kind of out there, so.
But that's
But I
exactly what we
did,
love.
in case anyone is curious, I mean, I do have the dev builds of these games.
Mm.
I am, because the guy who kind of, I mean, when you take a dev build with you, you're sort of kind of stealing from work, right? Which I think is fantastic. You should definitely, try to preserve as much as you can from your own work. But, to keep things nice and protect him for a little while longer, I am not publicly releasing them yet, but the Video Game History Foundation has them, and I'm sort of working through that right now. So we're just trying to figure out the best way to put it out there without getting anybody in trouble or ruffling any feathers. Because the company that he worked for no longer exists. But
technically, it would be property of Bayer, I'm guessing now.
Yeah, it probably is. It's probably property of Bayer, and his old coworkers and stuff are still out there. I mean, I'd prefer not to put targets on anyone's backs if I can.
Course.
So,
but that's something that's going to happen more and more in video game. Not just like because the amount of revisions that games go through, like the original version of when it released or prototype versions, a lot of the time code just gets deleted now.
Right.
If it'll go on to like a development Xbox One for a preview event and something, and then it's deleted as soon as the event is over, and then down the line versions of code just get deleted and then they're gone. And yet obviously we're not gonna advocate stealing from work or anything, but it is sad that
I advocate stealing from work.
Well,
unless you work for me, but that's a little different. Steal things that you don't intend to resell from work. Steal things that don't have, that don't specifically hurt your company by. I don't know how to explain it, but basically, I think that you absolutely should keep a backup hard drive for yourself full of all the stuff you've worked on, and then quietly pass it off to someone, and stay completely anonymous the whole time. But this stuff, until the video game industry gets on board and understands that this stuff is culturally important, needs to be saved, even if the only people that can access it are like, the top of the top researchers, only academics, not shared with the public. I get all of that. I really do. I don't think that everything a game company does needs to be public, but I think it needs to be preserved.
Well, for legal purposes and considering I work for a video game company, I probably need to say that I don't advocate it. But obviously that you are entitled to your opinion, of course. So I will
don't steal from your work. There we
go. There we go. Just let somebody else do it. So I will gladly accept the Gluco Boy. But how would you suggest that we present it in this non-existent museum and with this item that we don't have and possibly can't get?
This is such a tough question. When I listened to the episode with Kinsey, I felt like she had such a great answer for this.
To be fair, she had 2 attempts at it.
I can't really have our museum guests stab themselves. That's not really...
Good point.
That's not really a fair way to display this product. So I think, as much as I would love to make this one super interactive, I think this is one that is better off as just kind of a story and maybe some kind of timeline that walks you through, because there was a whole lot of there were a good 4 years that this was being worked on before it ever hit the market. Nintendo didn't want to do it. Nintendo said no over and over and over again, and it's really just kind of a story of perseverance and triumph, which is why I love it so much. And I know that what stands out to most people is just that it's super weird, but after talking to Paul Wessel, I really love that this got made at all. I mean, it's so many points he probably should have given up, but he didn't. So I don't know. I think this is a tough one because it probably doesn't really interact well. Maybe you can play the games themselves, but it's not one that
you're not going to
It's
ask
one where the
people to,
story I think is more interesting than the actual
yeah.
games themselves.
You're not going to ask people to step up and stab themselves for the
No.
purpose repeatedly, consistently to get in-game currency. No, I think you're right. I think it's it's going to be one of those built with a little plinth or a glass case, and then a little explanation of what it did is probably going to be. It's not going to be an interactive exhibit. That's
Yeah,
but not all of them are.
unfortunately.
Not all of them are. So before we wrap up, what have you been playing recently, Kelsey?
Well, you know what? At the time of recording this, we are just a couple hours away before Tales of Vesperia re-releases, I should say,
Mm.
on Switch, and I'm a huge Tales series fan, so I've basically just been kind of playing random things half-heartedly, waiting for this to come out for the last week. So I've been playing some Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, of course. That one came out kind of recently. And I decided that I would finally open my copy of Sonic Forces and give that one a try. So, but I'm not crazy into playing both of those, and I'm going to drop them as soon as I get Tales of
So
Vesperia.
basically, you've been avoiding things that have like really in-depth stories and long.
Exactly. I've
Right.
just been playing things that I can play for like 30 minutes and then drop at any moment. So
So you're prepared for when Tales comes out.
I'm prepared. That was one of the few that I haven't played, which I have no excuse for because I had an Xbox 360 when that came out. It was an
Mm.
Xbox 360 exclusive at first. Um, but for whatever reason, I must have just been distracted by another game or something because usually I play all of the Tales games when they come out, but not this one for whatever reason.
How many hours roughly? Do you know how it is to
Ooh.
beginning to end?
Oh my gosh.
A lot.
I could start counting. We started with Fantasia, which was on Super Famicom, but then again on
No,
Game
sorry.
Boy
Like how
Advance.
many hours of gameplay in the
Oh, I'm
yeah.
sorry. How many hours are they? Usually like they're usually under 60, honestly. So
Oh,
not
okay.
horrible for a JRPG. I would say I get through most of them in about 50 to 60 hours.
Mm.
I'm trying to think if there's any exceptions. I'm sure there are, but one of my other favorite RPGs is the Xenoblade Chronicles series, and
Mm-hmm.
when I finished Xenoblade Chronicles 2, I had 165 hours in it. So, that's the Tales games look very reasonable by comparison.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've been. I mean, full disclosure, I worked on Assassin's Creed Odyssey, but I've been playing it recently, and I'm about 80 hours in, and I've just realized how much more there is to go. It's
Oh
like
gosh, there's
it.
so many games like that these days. I mean, it's great as long as you're enjoying it, because for
Oh
me at
yeah.
least, I'm like, I don't want this to end, which is great. But at the same time, I'm like, I don't have time to play most releases now because I liked this game so much.
Well, that's it. I mean, I'm really enjoying it, but then at the same time, we have other stuff that's about to be released, and it's like as soon as I'm gonna have to drop this at some point, and I know there's so much that I still want to play. But then presumably, I mean, you'll just be gone to the world when the new Animal Crossing comes out.
Oh yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
actually, no,
I mean,
to be fair, no, because Animal Crossing is that kind of game where you don't necessarily need to play it. Well, you don't play it all in one go. You come back to it.
that's true, but for me at least, because I'm very hardcore about Animal Crossing, which is a funny thing to say because it's not a hardcore game at all. But like I'll tell you what happened when I got New Leaf, which was the 3DS one. So
Mm.
of course I got it on release day, and then what I always do with Animal Crossing games, because they always do it this way, and it's really, I hope they fixed it in this game. But basically, you get your tools, like the tools you need to
Mm.
just do anything in the game, like a fishing rod and a bug net and all of that. You get them slowly, one at a time,
Mm.
one day at a time. And so what I always do is I set my clock back a couple days on whatever device it is, and then I really quickly go through like the first 4 days to
Mm.
get back to, present day, just so I can get all of the tools. And then I start grinding. I just start catching fish and bugs forever and ever and ever until I have like an okay amount of money, um, because I'm not very patient. So I want to be able to start putting my house together a little bit pretty quickly. which really, I mean, the game doesn't want you to do that, so
No.
it's very grindy. So I'm excited that I have Twitch this time, so I can basically entertain myself by talking to other people while I'm essentially just grinding for hours and hours.
Animal Crossing is it's a weird title in that it essentially is just a grind. I mean, it's kind of eventually you get the house and everything that you want, but it's kind of like the fun is in the grind, which is it must be almost impossible concept to, if you were sitting down to plan Animal Crossing for the first time and just be like, it's going to take this much grinding, people probably wouldn't greenlight it.
Right.
Because they're just going to go, well, people will hate this, but people
Yeah,
love
it's
Animal
really in
Crossing.
like what makes it fun. I mean, of course there is the grinding and that sort of thing. At least it's not, it's not horrible grinding. At least
No,
it
no,
kind of you
exactly.
change it up a little bit. But a lot of the fun is in just sort of slowly watching something come together with your
Mm,
vision and then sharing it with other people too, like,
mm,
whether that's inviting people over to your town or posting photos online and stuff. I mean, I all the way back to the very first Animal Crossing game, I was doing that, like on message boards. People were, comparing. We would, use our little digital cameras or whatever
yeah.
to take a photo of our screen because there was not really other options that, at least that I knew of at that point. So, you know uh just showing things off to each other, and kind of making something that's your own. It sounds really like deep and kind of sappy, but it's true. I mean, it really is. Like, for most people, the reason they like Animal Crossing is because they get to kind of be creative and create something that's uniquely their own, and
Mm,
no two towns look alike, and no two houses look alike, and everyone just sort of has their own vision. And when it's all done, you're like, wow, I've built something I'm really proud of, and I want to share this with other people.
mm. Well, I mean, it shows, I mean, just how much people love Animal Crossing and that. My first one that I got was New Leaf. And then obviously, some games have, you can kind of understand how much people love the game by how many amiibos it has. And then with New Leaf, there was so many you had to have the amiibo cards, but then one thing I didn't realize, because we never got the Game Boy Advance e-reader over here. I've now managed to find one because I that thing just fascinates me. And I've only got a few American games on my shelves, and one of them, I think it's over here. You won't be able to see it. It's just out of shot. Is Animal Crossing on the GameCube, because that used the e-reader cards for in games. And I was kind of like, I don't own the UK version of that. I specifically wanted the American version of it because I wanted to try and figure out what this thing is to be able to use the e-reader, because it just because I think when I got the e-reader, it was packed with, oh god, so many Animal Crossing cards. There's just so many of them. I mean, you must have folders full of them.
I do. Between the e-reader cards and the amiibo cards, well, I have a dedicated binder for my e-reader cards, and then I have two binders full of the Animal Crossing amiibo cards. Um, and I'm very close to a full set. I think I'm missing 9 out of 450
Wow.
something. So, um,
But
not too bad.
I tell you what they were really good for. You probably know this, but on the Wii U, you could if you registered a amiibo, you could get basically like an NES game or something on your Wii U. And obviously, amiibos are, what, at the time they were like 12, £13, whereas the amiibo cards, you could get a whole pack of them. So you can just sort of register those amiibos, and then it unlocked content. And it was perfect. It's like, you don't need all these pieces of plastic when you've got all the amiibos you need in this little stack.
Yep. It's also great for Breath of the Wild too. I
What?
had, 400 plus amiibos I could scan, to get me like food and weapons and that sort of thing in that game, so you didn't have to actually go find it
Ah,
yourself.
I'll be honest, I haven't played Breath of the Wild yet, but I had heard that, amiibos are essentially like currency to a certain degree in that. So I'll have to make sure because I've
Yeah, rather than like having to go and forage for food to cook meals and that sort of thing, you just tap a bunch of amiibos in a row, and then you don't have to do that.
so ironically, Animal Crossing in Breath of the Wild is the anti-grind. It's sort of like I like that. I like
That's great.
the juxtaposition of that. Um So I guess I mean that pretty much brings us to the end of this episode. So I want thank everyone for tuning in, and thank you, Kelsey, obviously for getting around to this. We've been trying to do this video for quite a long time. I'm gonna go back to bed now, considering it's 20 to 5 in the morning and I've got work tomorrow. Um, but yeah, thank you for joining us, everyone, and until next time, everyone. It's goodbye from me, and I'm assuming it's goodbye from Kelsey too, unless she wants to hang around. We'll see you later.
Thank you so much.